But funny enough, Abigail ends up being the one who I later on was the peak for my transition, because I went to her wedding and my first ever feminine outfit, and all of her family was calling me she, her pronouns. And at the end of it, she was
Oh,
like, "You are a woman, Jenny," and she helped me understand that. And that happened in 2020. Welcome to Light in the Fog podcast, an intergenerational, interdimensional, and intersectional conversation about spiritualism, witchcraft, trauma recovery, and the evolution of body and soul. In today's episode, I relate the origin story of my synchronistic connections to witchcraft and my first goddess, and how they both helped me on my gender trauma journey. And Trai talks about growing up in haunted houses and why not to conduct a seance at 12 years old. Join us as we part the veil.
hi, and welcome to Light in the Fog podcast. We are here today to talk about one of our all-time favorite subjects. And what is that, Jenny?
Witchcraft! Woo!
Magic, supernatural, paranormal.
Metaphysical stuff.
That's right. All the things that mark us as being, I don't know, off in our own little space. But the good news is that space is filled with lots of other people just like you.
Yeah, definitely. And it'll be good to talk about, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand what witchcraft can be or how it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about the psychic medium stuff. Whenever I tell people that I talk to people who have passed over, they usually the response is this: "Oh, I don't believe in any of that. But you know what? I grew up in a house where there was banging all the time, or I once saw my dead dog like crossing the street." Or I mean, like everybody's got ghost stories. Everybody's tapped into the other spaces. And do you feel like the psychic medium stuff and the energy healing, all of this is crosses over into witchcraft, my dear?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and for me, witchcraft is just one of those blanket terms that's used to describe quite a lot of things. I would say similarly to magic, although not everybody who identifies with the term magic identifies with the term witchcraft. And so, yeah, I would say it's all magic, and it's all different forms of magic, especially because I don't think people fully understand what magic is. So it all bleeds together. It's all...
It all bleeds together.
Just because you understand it doesn't mean it's fake, and just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's real, like... or the other way around.
Or the other way around. Any old way.
Yeah.
There's layers. It's complicated,
Yeah,
darn it.
it's an onion.
Complicated. Well, I think one of the early things that I certainly struggled with as a Gen Xer was, oh my gosh, nobody was really talking about this. There were some oddball spaces like Leonard Nimoy, Spock from Star Trek. One of his series was called In Search Of. And he was talking about paranormal stuff, and he was talking about ancient civilizations that used magic. Almost every ancient civilization has tons, and some of that still carries forward in some religions, where they make use of whatever magic is. And he would talk about aliens, which blew my mind.
Wow.
Yeah. But that was kind of the extent of things. So as a Gen Z, do you feel like you have some support in that space?
To be honest with you, and without delving too much into the origin of things yet, for me, like, yes and no. I would say my generation is certainly a lot more willing to get behind it, and like, me growing up, it was always one of those things that, like, yeah, I could see it being real and like believing in it, and like there was the part of me inside that really wanted it to be real, like Santa, but like, well, and I think that's a good thing to bring up too, is how real it actually is, unlike Santa. But like, yeah, I would say my generation's a little more behind it. I have a lot easier time explaining myself to other Gen Zers than any of my Gen X or Boomer family, where if I say I'm a witch and I'm a healer, they're just like, oh, if that works, whatever that's cool.
Would you like some more tuna casserole, dear?
Yes, exactly. Where they're just like, okay. And they don't really ask what that means. And because of how I understand this information to work, I don't elaborate with people who don't want to know. So, it's just like, yeah, I would say, yeah, it's better with Gen Zers. Certainly easier. There's more of us, that's for sure, that are witchy.
Yeah. I completely agree. Let's take a step back and tell some stories.
Yeah, definitely. I was like, we're going to get into the trauma that was blocking me if we keep going, and that's next week's episode.
That's next week. Trauma week 4. Magic week 2. Okay, so as a kid, what can you connect to any memories of magic coming in?
So I feel like I'm gonna have to lightly dust the kid sides of me, because when I talk about what blocked me, it's gonna really primarily focus on my pre-transition years, and it's hard for me to reflect on that time because of memory loss, and also just because I was a different person back then, so the way I reflected back then was different. But with that being said, yes, there were moments that were, the best way I could put it at the time is too coincidence to be a coincidence.
Ooh, I love
yes.
it. Tell me
and
more.
I think the biggest one for me was it was my freshman year of high school. And we had this class called the Adventure class, which is a class where it is led by student peers who have taken leadership training and group dynamics training. And it's a class that throughout the entire semester, the whole point is to build trust among a group of students so that at the end of the semester, they can go on this high elements course that's 30 feet in the air and belay each other, literally have each other's lives in each other's hands at the end of the year, and how to build that trust over the span of 12 weeks. So, it's a really, really intuitive class, and a lot of it was about trauma, and a lot of it was about emotional comfort, as well as physical comfort and physical group dynamics. But anyway, at the end of the class, we had to do this thing called acknowledgements, where we draw a name of somebody else in the classes out of a hat, and we had to get them something that represented who they are as a person. And you're not going to know who had you until the end, so we'd sit in a circle and present. And at the time, I was listening to this song pretty much on repeat called All I Need by AWOL Nation. And I love that song. It called to me in the void. I heard it, and I remember being snapped to my reality. And then it was the first song I was ever able to listen to for days and days and days on end and not get sick of it. So the person who had me for acknowledgements, she was one of the leaders of that class. I'm not going to say her name just to protect identity, but we'll call her Abigail. And, Abigail, what she did is she got me a cabinet door that had the lyrics to All I Need on it. And the thing is, I barely remember it even. She one time asked me what bands I was listening to, and all I said was I was listening to AWOL Nation at that time. I didn't mention the song. I didn't say what song, any of the albums or anything, and she chose that song. Of all the songs she could have chosen by them, and it's not their most popular, of all the songs she could have chosen, that was the one she chose. And it had the lyrics painted out, and then it had 5 symbols around it that represented me, and the symbols were a hand, a tree, a lion, a duck, and then I believe a heart. The heart was for how much heart I give. The lion is for how much courage and leadership I show. The tree is because of how much roots I plant. And the hand is because of how much I help out the community, and is also to represent the Give a Hand program. And the duck wasn't just any duck, she said. It was a mama duck, because I might seem like all of the other ducks in the community, but I'm really more of a mother duck. I can come. What she was saying is I can come through and help lead. And when she showed me that and said all of that, everything fell away. It was just what the heck moment. How did she know about that song? That's the song I've been listening to a lot. I just burst out in tears. I couldn't not. And it was just a moment of okay, this isn't a coincidence. Something is watching through. And it was hard pressed for me to believe it was like a singular God. I definitely had my moments of like, is it God? But my mom didn't ever force religion down my throat like that. But funny enough, Abigail ends up being the one who I later on was the peak for my transition, because I went to her wedding and my first ever feminine outfit, and all of her family was calling me she, her pronouns. And at the end of it, she was like, "You are a woman, Jenny," and she helped me understand that. And that happened in 2020. Her wedding was in 2020. Wow. So it's like the world was setting me up for this path that I had to take. And it was just a small moment of just like, I just feel being called to this, like, in just such a strange way. And between that time that cabinet door happened in 2020, there were a couple moments, but so much of them were revolved around my trauma as a person and around me being trans, much less than witchcraft, I would say. So it really wasn't until 2020 that I connected with somebody else who, ended up showing me kind of witchcraft ropes, if you will, because I was just trying to be more femme. She was actually someone at the film school that you and I both came from, and she just had a Facebook profile that had a bee on it, and I really loved bees, and I was drawn to her, and I was like, we need to hang out. I don't know why. I'm not sure why.
That's called intuition.
Yes, and we only hung out a handful of times where we didn't have a continued friendship afterwards, but the handful of times were witchy, and she talked to me about how she practices, and we went to a graveyard together and felt graveyard vibes, and understood what being there meant, and it just...
Okay, so what's a graveyard vibe? Because I think it might be different for different people.
Well, and I always get confused on graveyard versus cemetery. I know one of them is specific to being a church there, and I can't remember which is which ever. For me, graveyard vibes are... It's this eerie stillness and this calmness, not only because there's not a whole lot of sound going on around it, but just because there's so much death around that space, that it just really pulls you to your setting, and it pulls you to be aware of where you're at. And I feel like that's why a lot of people are afraid to be in graveyards a lot of the time, is because I feel like you just recognizing where you're at sheds a layer of your ego, because whatever problems you're going through in the moment suddenly don't matter as much because you're just walking on top of dead people.
That is such a great way to put it. Yeah, like we're going to pick up on the energy of those places no matter what, yes, regardless of whether we can, assign terminology to it or know exactly how it's working on us. That's lovely.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I could keep going from there just in terms of getting connected with deities, because there is one in particular that I know I'm allowed to talk about today, and, go into that.
And what does that mean, that that you're allowed to talk about?
So I'm connected to 2 deities right now. There's the third that I know I'm going to get connected with later in life. One of them, it's very just a particular relationship. The main one is Hecate, and she's the first one I was ever connected with, and she is a kind of deity where if you don't want her in your life, that's okay. She's not going to force it, but if you do, she'll embrace you no matter who you are. And so I feel okay saying her name. I feel okay people knowing that that's who I'm with. I know that she'd be okay with that, and she'd want that. Versus my other one, it's very much if you ask about it, I'm allowed to talk about it, but anytime I've brought it up on my own, my gut feeling was just like, this doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. Like, I need to stop talking about this. And so I'm going to respect that. Maybe it's another future episode. But yeah.
At some point, at some point I could see that being part of the conversation. So explain who Hecate is and what was your first contact?
So Hecate is basically, to generalize, she's seen as the goddess of witchcraft. So I feel like anytime you're doing any sort of specifically witchcraft, and you are specifically identifying as a witch, you're going to have a connection to her in some way, whether you think about it or not. and she's just been through so much literature and mythology. And the thing is she has a lot of different names, where in so many different cultures there's different deities that arose around witchcraft, and they all kind of fall under the umbrella of Hecate, you know. So I wouldn't confine her to a race or a species or a nationality. I wouldn't be surprised if she came from somewhere first, but like, she's always been there. If you look at texts that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, she will pop up at least sometimes. And so it's really interesting, that idea. And, you know, I'd always heard her name, and when I was younger, I just thought it was a cool name. I'm pretty sure she's brought up in the Percy Jackson books, which I loved as a kid. And at the time, I pronounced her name Hecate, and so I was just like, that doesn't feel right. My brain always tripped up on that. And it was...
And she don't care, because that's not a real name.
Yeah, one, you know, you were talking before the episode about C versus K, and she has both. She has a spelling with C and a spelling with K. And so, you know, I'd always heard her name, and around 2020 I decided, I didn't decide, but I was called to doing witchcraft more, especially because I was a newfound trans woman who knew she was trans now, you know, and who is this new version of myself? And for some reason, witchcraft just kept coming back up. And I just knew Hecate's name, and I was interested in her, and I liked the idea, but I didn't want to just jump in, you know, and start worshiping this deity who I know nothing about. So I decided that when I find a book that fits, or when I get more research, then we'll look into it. And there was one time I was at Tattered Cover with my roommate and best friend.
Which is a bookstore in Denver. Was it the old Tattered Cover or one of the newer branches? Because that old one's got some magic.
I know which one it was, so then maybe you can tell me if it's old. It's the one that's right across from the CA Film Center, Twist and Shout.
Yeah, okay, so that's a branch, but it's got some nice juju.
Yes.
It's got the circle in the middle of it with an atrium, and that is a very magical
well, and their metaphysical section is right on the outside of that circle. So I was with my roommate, and they find a book called Entering Hecate's Cave by Cindy Brannon, and they just give it to me, and I start reading it. I just sit down and find a spot and start reading it, and holy crap, everything falls away. I've never had an experience with a book like this before, where I start reading it and my entire surrounding, it's like muting it, you know. If you think about film, when the entire thing is out of focus except for the main person, that's what it felt like. And my body was just doing this thing where I kept getting goosebumps and shivers as I was reading it.
Wow.
And at a moment I was like, this is scary. Like, I'm scared. I don't know how I feel about this. And as I had that thought, the book said, I know you're probably scared right now, and if you're not, then you shouldn't be reading this. And so literally had a question.
Bibliomancy, we love it.
I literally had a question in my mind about how real was this, and in the moment the book said, this is real. And I had just spent...
Okay, now I'm getting goosebumps.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
And I had just spent a bunch of money at Tattered Cover, so I couldn't afford this book. And I was like, if it's here in a week, I need to buy it. And during that entire week, there wasn't a single day that went by that I didn't think about that book. Every day I'd wake up and it would be one of the first things to enter my head. Like a crush, you know, like I was just so enthralled. And I went back and the book was gone a week later. It wasn't there anymore. And I didn't care. I decided that I knew what I needed. So I looked up the author and I found out she had another book at a Barnes & Noble called Entering Hecate's Garden, which is specifically about using witch herbs, which is my jam. I was an herbalist.
As it turns out, that was the book.
And I was already into herbs at that time, so I was like, that's perfect. And so I read it, and there's a ritual in there, and I read it under a tree, and they had me do a couple rituals, like a grounding ritual where you tap into nature and whatnot. And there's just a couple moments with that grounding ritual where it started to feel real, you know, like, and I don't want to get into it too much because it would take up a lot of time, but
there will be an episode because I must hear this story.
Yeah, well, and I'm still going to give you the better tidbit of all this, but One of the rituals was a trance ritual, where you get in your bath, you put rose petals and lavender and olive oil in your bathtub, and then they had this long speech for you to chant out with your candle, and then you do breath work in the bathtub and you keep reciting the speech. And I asked Hecate to help me work on my trauma, and to come into my life and ask her into my life and to bring my trauma forth. I'm ready, is what I was saying. And every day since that ritual, I saw more and more moths. It coincided with the season.
Moths.
Yes, it coincided with the
Okay.
season where moths were just coming in like crazy in 2020, in 2023. Yeah, because this was 2023. And so, nothing really happened in that moment, but I did feel different week to week. Later on that week, actually a couple weeks later, my good friend and I will say their name is Marsh, because I have a feeling we'll end up having them on the show. They wanted to do a ritual together. And so we did, and it involves a call and response. And on my call and response, I used Paige's text from that paragraph, and Marsh repeated it. And a month later,
Okay, I can feel it from here. That was really powerful.
a month later, they call me and they say, Jenny, I have to tell you something. And I was like, what? And this was at a time where I had finally found Entering Hecate's Cave, and I was reading that because that book focuses on trauma.
This was the book from the
Yeah.
tattered cover, the one that somebody scooped up.
And that book focuses on trauma. And Marsh was like, when I said that text, I had a vision. And the vision they described was them wading through ankle-high water into a cave. They described what color the water was and what color the cave was. And they described hearing this sound. And everything that they were describing was detail for detail in the book that I was reading. The book that they had never seen, the book that they didn't even know about. It was literally on the page that I was on. And Marsh was saying all of that, and I just get this intense goosebumps, chills. And I'm like, Marsh, I need to read to you what I'm reading right now. And I read it to them, and there is just silence. And they're like, I just had the most intense goosebumps. Like, they had a vision of the thing that I was reading. And, like, I didn't believe it. I didn't, I thought this was just something you project. I thought it was confirmation bias at certain points, where it's like, of course, if you want to believe it, you're going to see it. But as we were having this conversation, it started raining outside. And it was just this moment of like, holy crap, this isn't...
I have stepped into, or I have left the
stepped
matrix.
into it. And it's like, holy crap, this is real. This isn't a coincidence. I can't just write this off. Like, Marsh said these magical texts that I said, and they had a really crazy spiritual experience because of it. And so Marsh and I started doing rituals together, and over the course of 6 months, a few things happened where I moved out of the place that I was living and I moved in with my current roommate and best friend. I changed jobs. And I started to become more aware of myself and just the impact I was having. And as soon as all three of those positions were met, I started working on my trauma really hardcore at this house. Really, really hardcore, because suddenly I wasn't living in an environment that was toxic anymore to me. Suddenly my work wasn't toxic anymore to me. I had nothing on the foreground except for what was going through my head and what I had been through. And oh my gosh. And I realized that's exactly what I had asked Hecate for. And I was expecting it to come week to week, but it took a year. It took a whole year from that ritual to get what I was wanting out of it, which was how it was supposed to be. It was slow and steady,
Right. There's the concept of divine timing,
Yeah.
right? Like, so people say lots of things, but one of the things that resonates is, what belongs to you will not pass you by. Like, at some point, it will come into you, into your space. And there's things that you can do to sort of prepare to be ready for
Yes.
it, and to, to like, you invited Hecate into your life, and that was a relationship that you were willing to start. So that was a big piece of it. But then there's also the folks who are like, but I've been doing the rituals, but I've been doing the manifestation stuff, I've been doing this, it's been so long, and nothing is happening. And then I kind of feel like it's a cop-out every time I hear it, the Gen X in me, because please, we're some cynical people. We're just like, divine timing. That's such a cop-out. But it can be true.
Yes.
That, like, things have to align. Certain information has to be present. That's one of the things I definitely learned as a filmmaker for a long time. And you'd talk about, like, willpower and just pushing and pushing and pushing on a project to get made, and you're like, what, I'm doing everything right, I don't understand, and I'm doing it in 7 different directions, like, how is this not working? And to have that in your head, where it's just like, if it doesn't come together, like, like, what did I do wrong? And nothing. You didn't do anything wrong. Like, it just, like, that wasn't the thing that you were supposed to do. But there was lessons that you were supposed to get from it. So yay you. But this is the beginning of a lifelong journey for you. I can feel that very. And strongly.
It was the curtails. It was the end chapter for my transformation chapter. It was the last pages of my transformation chapter, of me transitioning, me finding witchcraft and finding spiritualism. And then at the end of it, I cycled through my trauma and started going through my trauma pretty hard with the spirits.
By the way, that doesn't happen just once.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
No, I'm hip. I'm just saying, like,
Done.
The first chapter of my transitioning, because I'm always growing as a person.
Okay.
But yeah, that was, that's kind of the general plot summary of it all.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for telling us.
Yeah, and I have a bunch more, especially when I end up talking about the other deity, because slow and steady is not how it works with that other deity at all.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, and she's incredible.
Yes. But yeah, so thank you for having this space.
She's like that scene in, oh my gosh, do you remember Jeff Bridges, Rosie Perez? They were in a plane crash, and they were the only ones who lived. And he could not get back into this world. It freaked him out so badly that he wasn't dead, and he completely disassociated. It's an amazing movie. I think Falling. I have to look it up now.
I got you.
Yeah, Jeff Bridges, in the heyday when Jeff was. He's always fabulous, but he was particularly fabulous here. But there's the scene where
Fearless.
He challenged Fearless. Thank you. He's challenging this scene where, does he deserve this life? Is he invincible now? Like, what was he supposed to get from living through a plane crash where 300 people died? So he gets in a car, and he hits the pedal, and he just goes 100, 110, 120, and he smashes into a cement wall because he can't accept the magic of the situation. His ego-based mind could not get there. And yes, so many of my life lessons have absolutely come from movies and books. So I really, really, really relate to you saying, like, I'm reading this book and all of a sudden I know things.
Yes.
Or it wakes up things that were, like, in your head. But anyway, so the point of bringing up the Jeff Bridges thing is, I feel like there's moments where we all do that, where we, so the other deity that you work with, she's kind of like that. Get in the car, hit the gas.
You're going to crash. It's going to hurt. It's going to suck, but you'll be fine.
You're going to crash. But what's on the other side of that?
Yes.
And it's terrifying because there's always so much trauma already in just being a human. It's very, very hard to be human. But then to also add in these moments where we crash into walls, it's kind of horrible. Now, I'm not one of those people that actually thinks that, we have to suffer. Like everybody who runs around saying, like, oh, well, I had a horrible, horrible life, but look at me now. It's what made me. And I came into this world thinking, oh my God, do you know what my capacity is, I knew this, my capacity was infinite. If you would just stop messing with me.
I agree. We are who we are despite the trauma, not because of it, is what I believe.
Yes.
If anything, it's a way to nerf us, like limit us.
Yes, which is a whole other thing that we have to talk about, because I think that makes us, I mean, we're obviously not the only people who think this, but I just don't think you have to suffer to succeed. I don't think you have to suffer to repair or to learn lessons. Now, that said, when you're deep in the trauma, like we both have that experience, you're so blocked, and there's so many other forces out there that are constraining you, and putting you in all kinds of boxes and contracts and, and karma. There's things that that you're trying to work through in this life. And, to me, it's like, oh my God, if you could just give me some peace and quiet for like 3 months, just imagine what I can get done with that. And then, how long does it last? I elect now. I feel like I tell the universe this all the time. Look, man, I've done my time. I've done my suffering. I've done it. I've hit that wall a million times.
On me. I'm good.
From here on out, only light and love, man. Just keep it quiet. If I don't learn anything else moving forward, I don't know if I care. Because I'm tired. Gen Xers are tired.
Yes, I can't imagine. I'm already tired, and I'm 2 generations later. Can't imagine how tired you are.
Another thing that we all have in common, right? It's like, that soul weariness, right? And you're trying to fight that soul weariness because the soul is the way. It's the way through all of this. But wow. Anyway, all right. So I'm going to tell a little bit of my background story, because I do feel like this is setting up nicely for what we want to talk about next week. And this is the stuff that these are the conversations that we're always having. So how very fun to get to have it in this format. One of the earliest. So I've always grown up in haunted houses. We had basements that were always absolutely terrifying to me. And please know I'm assigning like looking back as an adult, I understand what was happening, but like just imagine being a kid who like all this stuff is happening, nobody else is talking about it. I grew up in this is the thing I always say about my household growing up is I had 3 roommates whom I saw on occasion. Like I was deeply, deeply neglected as a kid. So there wasn't people to bring this to. And it was only, in my 20s that my sister and I actually did finally connect, and we started talking about some of because she's really psychic as well, and I call us the Wonder Twins, because when we get together, like all witches, my friends, when you are around other people who are tapped in this energy, it maximizes your energy, and you can just get way more done. So when she and I are together, like really strange things happen. Anyway, so we were talking about the houses that we grew up in, and and just feeling stalked, just always, always being watched. I've always been aware that there were people like, and they didn't have good intentions. And when I say people, please know, like, I don't know what they were. I don't know if they were human. I don't know if they were spirits, if they were entities, because I don't care to go back and look. Energy. I could. Just bad energy. And it took a really long time to understand, like, okay, so, good people end up in bad houses. But here's the thing. Really messed up people, this is my belief, end up getting attracted to really messed up houses. And then it maximizes, and then it's a feedback loop where your trauma energy is feeding the dark entity energy, so it gets stronger, and then that is working on the people and making you feel worse and worse, because the whole, like what the tools that the other side, the dark side really has is fear, and anger and self-destruction and all the negative things. And if you can't figure out how to, leave. Usually the answer is, if you can't find somebody to clear it, and if you can't figure out how to clear it yourself, like, just get out. Yeah. Because you're not going to win that fight.
Yeah.
So that's what the childhood was psychically. So the second house that we moved into as a family, which is really the house that completely disassembled. I mean, we were way on our way to disassemblage anyway. Both of my parents were extremely abusive. But the ghosts that were in that house, there were many, and they were very active.
Wow.
And there was a dude who would come out of my closet, because closets are portals, or can be portals. Not all closets are portals. Some closets just have fabulous clothes in them, and we're very happy to own them. And so, like, all the time, I would feel him coming into my room and just standing over my bed. And later, when I talked to my sister, she was like, yeah, he lived in the attic, and the access to the attic was in her room. So she was forever watching him, like, come out of the attic, you know, messing with her, coming in, messing with me, and then going back in the attic. And that's nothing. You know, as time went on, there was a ghost that would lock her dog in a bedroom and literally close the door on it, and we would know this because we'd come home and he had like tried to claw his way like out of it, so the dog was being terrorized. There was a poltergeist and a poltergeist is a different kind of an entity. We can talk about it some other time, but this is the one where it's not a ghost moving your keys, it's this other thing. And it was constantly moving things all over the house. And what was worse is it had taken a shine to my sister's husband. She ended up like moving into what are you bought the haunted house we grew up in? That's a trauma action.
Wow.
A trauma decision.
What a choice. Talk about shadow work.
It was a cheap, deal. It was a good deal. Yeah, I bet it was a good deal. Anyway, so I would go and stay with her. So this is moving forward. So that house was in our family for a while, and I would go and stay with her between college years. And there was something that like lived in the basement. This was the one that would terrorize the dog, and I was sleeping in the room that he used to terrorize the dog in, and I just told him, I was just like, okay, you don't cross this line. Like this is my room, this is my space. You can have the whole rest of the house, but don't mess this. And it actually worked.
Wow.
But here was the problem. If I got up in the middle of the night and I had to like go down the hallway to use the restroom, it was full on there. It was full on messing with us. And this all sounds like very abstract, but anybody who's been, like when you know somebody's watching you, and if it's happening all the time and things are going missing and electronics are doing weird things and there's thumping and banging on walls, like these are all, like it can be absolutely terrifying. All right.
Did your parents ever notice it?
In big time retrospect, I understand that both of my parents were like super psychic, and neither of them had any capacity. My mother was to the point because she always knew what we were up to, because we had to be really secretive with Barbara, because like you give Barbara. An inch, she takes. Yeah. She takes over the entire town. You learn early not to let that energy in, and but I would even just like think about her, and her energy would just like come smashing into my space, and I was like, "How do you know I'm thinking about you?" And then she would call.
Wow.
It's like she knew. She like, "Oh, the window's open. Here I come." Now, did she know that she was doing that? Nah, no. My dad, he was a Vietnam vet who suffered just horrible trauma, which we'll talk about next week, and the stuff that I got to inherit. But so the two big things with him is we would have these long conversations about the apocalypse. Now, he was an excommunicated Mormon, and he was somebody who also studied, he's the first person to study religion in the family, and then I got into it kind of in working with him, and he was always pointing out the end of the world. Now, if you know anything about the Mormon religion, they have this thing, the rapture, Jesus Christ is coming back and only some of us get to go, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So he did not go to church. He did not believe in any of this, and yet we had the Rapture Pantry, we had all the food for like 6 months, because he was waiting. There was some part of him that was waiting for the end of the world, and he gifted that to me. And then the world compounded it with, nukes. So here I am at 12 years old, and I'm watching the midnight clock, the countdown to midnight. And I'm literally waiting for nuclear bombs to drop, because we live in, Colorado has, NORAD.
Yes.
So growing up in Colorado, that was going to be a location that got hit. So a lot of people run around saying, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world. But there's this like 10-year-old in me being like, it's finally here. I've been waiting for this my whole life. Now, what are we going to do with our end of the world?
Yeah.
So most of my experiences was I was always being stalked by ghosts and other things. I didn't understand anything about portals, but I was surrounded by them all the time. I was astral projecting by 12. Oh, I had my first seance when I was 12. So part of the reason of bringing up my family is what you were talking about, like what your environment is. So, your family can end up like facilitating easy movement through hard things, or it can make hard things like way harder and way harder and way harder. And that was my family. So even by the time I was 12, I felt very, 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 very much on my own.
Yeah.
And that wasn't horrible, because I had my own interests. Thank you very much. And I was a Girl Scout, and we had our Girl Scout meetings at the Lutheran church that was down the road from our elementary school. And I was one of the older kids, so, here we are on our Wednesday, with our sashes, walking to the church, and the leaders aren't there. We usually meet them there. It was really weird. And we're hanging out, and our parents aren't coming for a good hour and a half. And, and there weren't cell phones, so it wasn't like, oh, just call and find out what's going on. So me and the other grown up, June, who was way more grown up than me, we were like, well, what should we do? And she goes, well, the worst thing we can do is let all of these little kids run ragged all over this church. So why don't we find a room, to center everybody and keep everybody contained? And I go, oh, let's have a seance. Dude, I have no idea where this thought
Especially
came
in
from.
a church. What a choice.
Well, churches are filled with dead people. Packed, chock-a-block. Packed solid, also with divine things. So, but mostly dead things. So, so she's like, what? And but the other little kids heard me, and they're like, seance, seance, seance. I've never done a seance. I think I've seen it in the movie twice. Like, what am I doing? So we go into the preschoolers' room, which is got, like this, like the solar system painted with smileys, and the big sun in the middle with a big old grin and big eyes. So we go in and we sit in a circle, and I'm just winging it. So I'm channeling, and I don't understand that, but I was channeling the entire thing. And there was one window in the door, and it was kind of a rectangle, 4x12, that let in some light from the hallway, but we turned off the lights, but there was enough light that you can kind of see a little bit. And I knew that Becky's grandmother had passed recently, and Becky loved her grandma. And I was like, okay, everybody, hold hands. Okay, everybody. Who knows what I said, but I like got us entranced, right? I got us all like ready for a seance. And then I called out. I was like, Becky's grandmother, we would love to talk to you. Becky really misses you, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm getting goosebumps even thinking about it, because two things happened. One, Becky's grandma showed up and started talking to Becky.
Wow.
And Becky heard her clear as day. And they were over there. I'm getting goosebumps.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm over there being like, well, that's happening. And Becky's talking to her. And she's like, yes, I miss, like this cake that Becky's grandma was telling her about the cake and how she wished that whatever. So and Becky's sobbing, and the girls around her, because we're all emotionally entrained, they're crying, and they're like, oh, this is so amazing. Now, the second thing that's happening, so Becky's having this amazing experience with her dead grandmother, and And the things that they were saying, like, I don't believe it was a trickster spirit because it was all very raw and personal. So I believe it to be true. In the middle of the circle, there is now a glowing ball.
How big was it? How much glow?
3 times the size of my head and like maybe 40 or 50%.
Wow.
And I'm staring at it and nobody else seems to notice it. And I'm like, what is that? And I look over at, remember June, the real grown up here? I look over at her and she's looking at me and she can see it too. She's like, what is happening? And then I look over at that wall. Remember the solar system that was all painted smiley, smiley, smiley? The sun now is snarling at me.
Whoa.
The sun has completely, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. It completely transformed and it saw me and it was angry. And it was, and I was like, what is happening? And I was like, June's over there, like, she's like, like, stop. And I'm like, I don't know what I did, but you're right. Like, whatever I have opened up here, like, I need to get it back in the box. And the room was so dark. That was the other weird thing. It was so dark. It wasn't as dark, like, it was more dark than when we started. Anyway, so I was like, okay, everybody, like, thank you, Becky's grandmother, thanks for coming, like, say goodbye, and everybody, like, I don't know what I was telling them, just, BS running out of my mouth. And I go, okay, so I'm going to go turn on the lights now. And I went to stand up and a hand on my shoulder, and I'm 12, I'm little, a hand on my shoulder shoves me back down in my seat. And I'm like, I'm so screwed.
Yeah, terrifying.
Because I knew somehow that turning on the lights, because by the way, guys, this is a trick. All little kids know it. Like, everybody's afraid of the dark because there's things in the dark. There's things in the dark. Turn on the lights. Turn on the lights because the light dispels the darkness. I mean, it's rudimentary 101 dispelling of darkness. And then I go, okay, so hey, June, would you mind getting up and going and turning on the light? So she gets up and goes over, flips on the light, and then everything just went, like, all the magic in the room, all the whatever that was, it just went, and we were safe again. And we never went back to that church. Probably because everybody went home and said, Trai gave us a seance at Girl Scouts today. And we met Becky's dead grandmother.
I know, I'm thinking about, I can't imagine what Becky reported back. How crazy. Wow.
Yeah. So lots of things to be learned there. I never did another seance because I realized that there was, even as a kid, even at 12, I understood that there was powers way, 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 way bigger than me. And I didn't know what I was doing, and I was being sloppy, and I could have gotten people hurt. And it was like a warning. That sun was looking at me like, little girl, like, just exactly who do you think you are? And I was like, my bad, I'm out.
Well, and
I'm
especially
out.
to be so in tune with that world at such a young age and to have so much power connecting with that world at such a young age. Yeah, you needed that warning because if you weren't careful, it's going to get way worse.
It was going to get way worse. And so now what I think with the because I've seen it in other, and I've heard about it, heard other people talking about, like, the light ball thing. So it wasn't an orb, it was bigger than that. I think it was a portal, and I end up with a very, very long relationship with portals over my lifetime. But the hand on my shoulder, like, that was pure evil, y'all. Like, that was not cool. So whatever I had called into that room. So long story short, to 2020, I had made a decision pretty early in my life that I just wasn't going to mess with the psychic stuff. I didn't understand it. There was zero guidance. The most was, well, tell the ghost to stop, to leave you alone. And that usually works. And I swear that's as much education as I was riding on. I call myself a hatch witch because I just, I'm like a crow. Like when I see something that makes sense, that helps me understand something, I will pick it up and take it home with me, because there wasn't organized education. And not that, and please no, I don't think that we have to be organized in our approach to this. You don't have to go to a school. But I wanted that for myself because it was banging on my door, just like it was banging on your door. I had I call her my psychic guru. She came to me and she's like, I run a Zoom group of women who are all psychics, and my guides say that you need to be in this group. And I've known her for like 10 years. And she's like, will you join this group? And I was like, no, because remember, I said no to all, even though it was happening on the daily. I will not deal with the psychic thing, and then like a ghost would bring in my glass of water. Thank you.
It's not for me. Oh, thank you, Mr. Ghost.
So she came back a second time and she's like, will you do this? No. And then on the third time, I was like, oh, all right. Because this is a trauma thing, right? Yeah. And that's another thing to unpack. So I joined the super group, and the psychic super group, and every week we got together and we just did readings of each other. And it was, Jenny, it was so easy. It was so easy. I knew everything. I saw everything. And it was, giving myself permission, but also a safe space, because my secret guru held the space. So there wasn't dumb 12-year-old Girl Scouts running amok, letting loose everything.
There was boundaries
confetti
already
for
set
everyone.
in place.
There was boundaries. So I did that, and that was the really big, I was like, well, I guess I'm in it now. But more than that, it was fun. I was having fun doing it. I liked knowing things, and more than that, because I'm a Leo, I like that other people knew that I knew things.
Wow. Yeah.
Hello, Ego.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always surprised you're a Leo. Wow, that's crazy.
You must be joking.
No,
yes. I'm the Leoest Leo that ever Leoed.
It's hard to disagree. Oh my gosh, definitely not. That's crazy. I can't believe yours is in 2022. When you were connected with this Zoom group, was this in the thralls of the pandemic, or was it right before it all hit?
Yeah, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. So, I mean, obviously that March, 13th date, was some magical, I'm sure if you did the numerology on it, it would just be chock-a-block with, you are stepping into a new world. And I also, at that point, found out, because I worked with a couple of different shaman, but I was never called to being a shaman. I was never called to being, to go down that path, the nature path. I like my air conditioning, and I like my MTV, people. I like being in front of a TV. That's my happy place. So other people I'm happiest in the woods, and I'm like, there's axe murderers in the woods. I want to go back and watch my cooking show.
That's so funny.
I see what's in the woods, and for anybody to be relaxed in the woods, it's crazy. How can you be relaxed in the woods?
If I get murdered in the woods, that was meant to be. That's just the divine intervention coming in and saying, it's your time, Jenny. You're in the woods, you're in your space, and you're dying. That's it. But yeah, I love being in nature, which is weird because I'm a cinephile. But if I'm gonna die in nature, that's it. Whatever. I'm not gonna stop me.
But you're an herb witch. Is there a word
herbalist
for witches who?
Yeah, that's what I call myself. I'm sure there's other words, but yeah.
Because different people get pulled to different tools and different kinds of magic, and especially in the witch world, for some people it's crystals, and other people it's sound stuff.
And me, it's very much
the smelly
tea
goodness.
Is my biggest thing is tea. Yeah,
tea.
Yeah, a lot of tea drinking for me. So. Yeah.
Nice. That's fabulous. Ooh, we have so much to talk about.
We did so good today. Do you feel like you got all of the Trai beginning stuff that you wanted to say in today?
More or less. I mean, it's infinite.
Yeah.
So, and I don't like to come in too prepared because I'm more interested in the exchange, and the riffing, and the things that you say always make me think of, a ton of things that I do want to contribute. And hey, we're going to be doing this for a while, so I'm sure we're going to get to all kinds of things. But I do think that, for our listeners, we kind of set the stage of how we were already existing in these other dimensions. Anything outside of, I think, the standard status quo makes you intersectional, yes. And we were both having these experiences from very early
yes.
on. So then it's hey, let's talk about the trauma next week. And then it's, how is the metaphysical stuff helping us find ways to, transcend, to evolve.
And I just also wanted to point out real quick that both of ours, there were things for us that led to it, but the actual shift was a choice on both of our ends. We had to choose it. And so you're not going to just get thrust into this world. If you're scared of it and you're not ready, don't do it yet. Take your time. Don't rush this.
Yep.
You have your whole life to do this. So, yeah. But when you're ready, the choice will be made.
That's a really good point. Yeah. But man, once it starts calling you, like you can't unsee and you can't unhear what you have seen and heard. So. Yeah, it took me till how old before I finally said, fine.
A literal world pandemic happening before either of us were like, all right, let's do this.
Fine. I'm going to rock that wedding in my best frock.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm going to be who I actually am. Well, I am honored to know who you actually are, Jenny. So thank you so much.
This was so good. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our viewers today and for tuning in. Right, cheers.
So cheers.
Meow, meow.
Meow, meow.